When I was a student at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama on the opera course, I was lucky enough to work with an extraordinary coach named Peter Bernet. Peter had spent many years at the Vienna Staatsoper and had worked with some of the greatest singers of the age. He was brilliant, inspirational, and full of stories. One day I asked him, in all your time there, hearing the greats night after night, who was the greatest? Who had the greatest voice? He didn't hesitate. Giuseppe Giacomini. At the time, the name meant little to me, just a name. But then I saw he was due to appear at the Royal Opera House in La Fanciulla del West. I managed to sneak into the dress rehearsal, and thank God I did. What I heard that day changed me. The voice was huge. Black, ringing, full of power and darkness and steel. It filled the house, not just loud, but alive. It was like a primal force, and I remember thinking, how is this not the most famous tenor in the world? But you have to remember, this was before the internet, before YouTube. The only way to explore voices was to hunt down CDs, imports, vinyl. Eventually, I managed to get hold of an Italian import, a CD of Giacomini singing arias. I'll never forget the cover. There he was, this man with glasses, a serious expression, a face that looked more like a bank manager or a geography teacher. How could that face produce this sound? Because the voice that poured out was like fire and thunder, throbbing, emotional, powerful beyond belief. When I played it for my fellow students, we were stunned, blown away. The sound seemed impossible, so dark and yet so rich. It was a voice that didn't just ring, it roared, it cried, it shook the walls. And from that moment, I was a believer. This is the story of the greatest tenor of his generation, who wasn't allowed to be known because the world only had room for 3 other blokes. This is the story of Giuseppe Giacomini, the greatest tenor you might never have heard of. Whenever I played that CD for someone who hadn't heard him before, the reaction was always the same. Who is this? Why haven't I heard of him? And why doesn't everyone know this voice? And it was a fair question, because this wasn't a nice voice or a sweet voice or even just a good voice. This was a voice that seized you. It grabbed your attention with its sheer size and darkness, but held you with something else. There was a fire in it, a humanity, a kind of wounded power, something utterly Italian, utterly real. And that's what made Giacomini different. He wasn't polished or careful or manufactured. He wasn't trying to sell albums or win over crossover audiences. He was a stage animal. He lived for the big dramatic roles. Chenier, Calaf, Otello, Canio, roles that demand not just vocal strength but emotional surrender. And he surrendered. When he sang, he gave everything. And you could hear it. In the top notes, yes, but also in the quiet moments. There was weight there, soul. And once you heard it, you never forgot it. But still, the mystery remained. How could a voice like that, a singer like that, not be a household name? He studied first in his hometown of Rovigo and later with Marcello del Monaco, the brother of Mario, which meant that he was directly connected to the Arturo Melocchi school of singing. Now, if you know your vocal history, you'll know what that means. The Melocchi technique is all about lowered larynx, deep support, open throat. A method built for heroic sound, not elegance. It gave the world voices like Mario del Monaco, Franco Corelli, and Giacomini was right there in that line. This was not a technique for the faint-hearted. It required a full-body engagement, a kind of primal anchoring that gave the voice its sheer mass, its core, its explosive top. And Giacomini made it his own. He debuted in Vercelli in 1966, and by the early 1970s was singing on the great stages of the world. Tokyo, Vienna, Verona, Covent Garden, La Scala. He was a true dramatic tenor, and he knew it. He didn't flirt with Mozart. He didn't dip into crossover. He went for the big ones. Chenier, Turandot, Pagliacci, Otello. And on stage, he was something else. He didn't just sing the role, he lived it. He was unafraid of rawness, of ugliness, of danger. That made him thrilling to watch, and often terrifying. He wasn't polished, he wasn't safe, but if you were in the house on the right night, you got something that no one else could give. And yet, there was always this gap between what the public heard and what the insiders knew. Why didn't he have the career his voice deserved? Part of the answer was nerves. But before we talk about his nerves, a quick appeal. If you're enjoying these videos and you wish to support the channel, you can now buy me a coffee via the link in the description. It's quick, it's safe, and it's really easy to do, and it really helps pay my bills and keep the lights on while I spend the hours making these videos. Monday morning, I put teaching videos out, and Friday, I put opera videos out. Channel's growing, we're having a fantastic community. If you want to get involved, find me down below. Thank you so much, and now back to the video. For all his on-stage power, Giacomini was known to be a deeply private man. And with that privacy came a shadow, nerves. He was infamous for cancelling, sometimes last minute, sometimes entire productions. And it wasn't arrogance, it wasn't caprice, it was fear. Not of the music, not of the stage, but of himself. Of whether he could live up to what was expected of him. Of whether he'd survive the pressure he placed on his own shoulders. Because when you sing like that, when you give everything, there is no safety net, no holding back. And for someone with Giacomini's temperament, that kind of total surrender could be terrifying. Some impresarios grew tired of the risk. Some houses stopped calling, and quietly, gradually, the spotlight drifted elsewhere. Meanwhile, three tenors, you know the ones, became a brand, a phenomenon, a global product. And Giacomini, he kept singing, sometimes in the great houses, sometimes not, but always with that same burning intensity, always giving the whole of himself, even if no one was filming. He didn't chase fame, he chased truth, and in doing so, he may have paid the price. Giuseppe Giacomini was born on September 7th, 1940 in Vercelli, a small town near Padua in northern Italy. He came from modest beginnings, the son of a working-class father and mother. And like so many great Italian tenors before him, his voice wasn't discovered in some glamorous setting, but nurtured through sheer determination, study, and a fire that burned inside. He studied first with Elena Ceriati, then at the conservatories in Padua and Rovigo, and later worked with Marcello del Monaco and Vladimiro Badiali, putting him firmly in the lineage of the Arturo Melocchi school. That vocal school emphasized a low stable larynx, forward tilt, and deep diaphragmatic support. A technique built for power, core resonance, and heroic singing. He made his professional debut in 1966 in Vercelli, singing Pinkerton in Madame Butterfly. From there, his career steadily gained momentum. In 1970, he debuted in Berlin in Manon Lescaut. He followed that with Il Tabarro in Lisbon, 1971, Tosca, Barcelona, 1972, and debuts in Vienna and Munich in 1973. His South American debut came in 1974 at the Teatro Colón in Buenos Aires, reprising Pinkerton and Il Tabarro. His American debut was at the Metropolitan Opera House in 1976, singing La Forza del Destino. The same year, he debuted at the Paris Opera, performing Forza and later taking on roles like Macbeth in Don Carlo and Pagliacci in Tosca and in Il Trovatore. In 1980, he made his Covent Garden debut in La Fanciulla del West, the opera that I first heard him in the dress rehearsal many years later, a moment I'll never forget. He was soon singing at La Scala, the Verona Arena, and other major opera houses across Europe and the world. In 1987, he performed in a historic open-air Aida production at the Giza Pyramids. In 1988, he sang Calaf at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Seoul. In 1990, he created the leading role in the world premiere of Marco Tuttine's La Lupa. He also helped revive rarities like Donizetti's Fausta and Leo Cavalli's I Medici. He was awarded the title of Kammersänger in Vienna in 1992, one of the highest artistic honors in the German-speaking world. And he received multiple prizes, the Gold Viotti, the Giovanni Zenatello Prize, the C.A. Capelli Prize, the Gold Mascagni, and the Giovanni Martinelli Prize, and was named a Commendatore of the Ordine di San Gregorio Magno by the Vatican. He continued singing well into his late 60s, including a Tosca at Covent Garden for his 60th birthday, still thrilling audiences. And in 2010, he toured China with the Shanghai Philharmonic, giving a recital at the Tianjin Concert Hall on September the 17th. He recorded only occasionally, but what exists is priceless. There's a Norma with Renato Scotto, a Cavalleria Rusticana with Jesse Norman and our hero Dmitri Forstos, Tosca with Carol Van Ness, André Chenier with Gena Dimitrova, and Otello with Margaret Price. His La Forza del Destino from the Met is also preserved. And yet, despite it all, he never sought the limelight. He gave few interviews. He wasn't one for celebrity circles or marketing. He married, raised a family, and lived a relatively quiet life, even as he stood on some of the world's most famous stages. He passed away on the 28th of July 2021 at the age of 80 in Veggiano, the same quiet town where it all began. How do you describe a voice like Giacomini's? Words fall short, but let's try. It was a voice of enormous size, yes, but not just loud. It was dark, burnished, with a kind of volcanic pressure behind it, like a furnace sealed in iron, and yet it could fly. The top notes, B naturals, high Cs, they came out like bolts of lightning, not just struck, hurled. What made this even more astonishing was the staggering amount of squillo in the sound. The Italian brilliance, that ring, it wasn't nasal or edgy. It came from deep within the core of the sound, and it pierced the orchestra like a laser. He had more squillo than almost anyone, but it never came at the expense of richness. How? Because he adhered fully to that lowered, forward-tilted larynx approach. The larynx wasn't just a low, it was anchored, elongated and set up to allow the vocal tract fully to do its work. And because of that, Giacomini achieved something that very few tenors do: seamless registers. There was no break, no shift. The chest, middle and head registers were all fused into one line, all supported, all resonating, all vibrating with that molten glow. He was, in many ways, the true hero of the chiaroscuro tradition, because the voice wasn't just dark, it wasn't just bright, it was both in astonishing degrees. The bottom of the voice could sound like a Verdi baritone, the top could blaze like a trumpet. It was a study in opposites and a masterclass in balance. That's part of what had made him so fascinating. He didn't sound like anyone else, and yet he carried the DNA of the Melocchi school, the low-set larynx, the deep appoggio, and the almost brutal stability in the throat. He could produce massive sound without distortion. The tone remained clean, round, and unapologetically masculine. And then there was the emotion, the ache in the middle voice, the sobs, the rallentandi, the way he could pull back ever so slightly before launching into an explosive high note. It was dangerous singing, the kind of singing that made you lean forward in your seat, because you weren't entirely sure what might happen next. Take his André Chenier. Listen to Come un bel dì di maggio, the tenderness, the anguish, the control. Then contrast it with Un dia l'azzurro spazio, the snarl in the declamation, the soaring arc of the line, the absolute freedom at the top. Or listen to his calaf in Nessun Dorma. That final Vincero isn't just triumphant, it's defiant, it's animal. It sounds like a man singing for his life. And yet he could be subtle too. There are moments in Pagliacci, in Otello, where the pain bleeds through, not just projected, but confessed. His voice was not perfect. It wasn't always pretty, but it was true. And when he was on form, there was nothing like it. And that's why he became and still is a kind of cult hero among certain fans. especially those who love Corelli, those who revere Del Monaco, those who want their tenors to sing like their lives depend on it. Giacomini was the next link in that chain, not a copy, not a throwback, but a continuation of that heroic, full-blooded, no-compromise style of singing. In fact, being a fan of Giacomini became almost a badge of honor, a sign that you had ears for something deeper. Because while the rest of the world was busy with the big three, those who truly listened knew that this was the voice, this was the sound, and that's part of what makes his legacy so powerful today. So why didn't the world embrace him? Why wasn't Giacomini up there in the pantheon with Pavarotti, Domingo and Carreras? It wasn't because he lacked the voice or the technique or the artistry. It was the timing, it was the nerves. It was the fact that he didn't chase the limelight, didn't play the game. And maybe, just maybe, the world only had room for 3 tenors. The marketing teams had made their decision, and voices like Giacomini's, real, raw, unfiltered, weren't easy to package. But that doesn't mean he was invisible. He did make recordings, not many, but enough to show the full glory of that sound. There's the Italian Arie d'Opera album. That's the one I found as a student, the one that changed my life. There's his recording of Pagliacci. His canio is devastating. And there are various live captures, Chenier in Tokyo, Calaf in Verona, some grainy and some imperfect, but all electrifying. And now, thanks to YouTube, to shared clips and fan pages and forums, people are discovering him. Younger singers, hardcore collectors, opera lovers burned out on the polished perfection. They're finding these old recordings, these videos with fuzzy audio, and they're having their minds blown. Because the voice is still there, still terrifying, still majestic, still human. And his reputation is growing, slowly, quietly, like a secret finally being whispered aloud. Giacomini passed away on July the 28th, 2017 at the age of 76. He died in Veggiano, that same small town as we said in northern Italy where he was born. He'd returned there later in life, away from the spotlight, close to his family. Quiet end for a man who once sang like fire and thunder, and may never have been a global superstar, but for those who know, he was the greatest. And that's what makes Giacomini's story one of the most moving in all of opera. Not a tale of fame, but a tale of truth. If you've never heard Giuseppe Giacomini, then please go and listen. Find a clip. Find that André Chenier from Tokyo. Find Un dia l'azzurro spazio. Find Nessun Dorma. Find Pagliacci, Otello, Turandot, anything. I apologize that I have to talk so much in these tributes. I have a lot to say, but YouTube also would copyright strike me if I left too much audio unspoken over. So find these videos and just to listen. Because when you do, you'll hear something rare, something elemental, something we don't hear anymore. For me, hearing him live at the Royal Opera House that one time was a blessing, a moment etched in my musical memory. I never heard Corelli in the flesh, that other superhuman tenor, but I heard Giacomini and I will never forget it. And this is the thing about singers like Giacomini. Their voices may fall silent, their bodies may pass, but their essence, that fire, that sound, that spirit endures. It's captured in air and electrons now, but it's no less powerful. Because every time someone new presses play, he lives again. And that voice roars once more. So go and listen, share him, talk about him, keep his flame alive, because Giuseppe Giacomini was not just another tenor. He was one of the greatest voices this world has ever known, and he deserves to be heard. Thank you.